Eternal life from a scientific viewpoint. Delon, are you on the line?
I am on the line. How's it going, Dan?
It's going real well. Good to hear from you, Delon. How's it going? Tell me about this eternal life from a scientific viewpoint thing you got going on.
Yeah. So this is kind of a new spin on it. I appreciate what you're saying about death is a really big psychological motivating factor for people to talk about, or it drives the conversation for centuries. But, you know, science kind of gives us a cool viewpoint about it, I think. I would say that not only is life eternal, but so is death. And so is before you were born eternal. And I'm basing this on something called the B theory, or block universe theory. And it's basically an interpretation that comes out of Einstein's relativity theory. And it basically says that the universe, if we were to actually be able to objectively step out of our universe and look at it, you can almost picture it like a cube, like a frozen cube of events, of timelines, and things of that nature, right? So it's called the block theory for that reason. But what this says is that all times that exist somewhere, that in the same sense. So in a way, the present, the future, the past, it all exists in the same sense, and not in the same time, but in the same sense, because in this way, time is kind of hard to talk about. But
yeah,
what that kind of indicates is that, you know, your death is eternal. It's eternally frozen. Your life, everything. So it's kind of goes back to what your last caller was talking about. But instead of us reliving some other person, I guess what this is saying is that, you know, your life continues. It's kind of like a movie. You know, your life is kind of like a strip of a movie, and you know, it plays as long as you're conscious, as long as you're aware of it. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I've actually heard of this idea before, and I think Reed's nodding his head here. I think he's heard of this as well. This kind of idea that time kind of exists differently outside of the human perspective as like a dimension, and that dimension can be kind of looked at all in one kind of place, I guess, is the best word or best phrase to describe it. I'm not a mathematician or a physicist or anything like that. I just know the popular science behind it. I read a book that talked about this one time, so I'm not an expert, but I think what you're saying is this idea that time is all together in one place, and we can, from an objective perspective, somehow, if you got that perspective, you can look at it in kind of one whole frame of reference, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. Reed, do you have, oh yeah, okay, so you agree. Okay, so maybe that is the best way to put it. But I think Reed and I would probably agree on the first question to ask about this would be, how confident are you in this belief being true?
I'm about as confident as I am in relativity theory. I mean, it predicted like time dilation. You know, that's why we have GPS. I mean, I think all of that is pretty much demonstrated. And so, you know, all of these different things that relativity theory predicted, of course, they all came true. And if it's consistent, then I would say that this idea of time, this interpretation about time, is probably just as true, just as real.
Interesting.
Yeah. I would want to back up and explore some maybe hidden premises in this argument and some definitions. So what I'm hearing you say is this: we have the universe is set in this block. It's just like includes the time and space and everything. It's just the past is set, the future is set, and this in some way gives us eternal life because it's all set anyway. So in some way you could say we have eternal life in that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and a from that perspective, and eternal death as well.
Yeah. Is this what people mean when they say they want to live, or they want eternal life usually, or is this different?
Obviously it's different. It's not a soul that continues after your death as a different substance that, that goes on and on and on. But in a sense, it kind of says something about conscious experience, because if this is true, if, this is the life that we have and it's set in stone, so to speak, then it's always here. So when we die, it's kind of just another perspective. It's another, it's just another state of our being. But what this kind of tells me, though, some of the, I guess the, how should I put it? I don't know, something that makes me feel a little at peace with this whole thing of life and death is that this notion of the self, this kind of shows like that the universe is very deterministic. The fact that everything is set in stone, so to speak, everything is deterministic. So that what that kind of says is that it kind of has implications about what we mean by the self and free will and things of this nature, right? And so it kind of relieves you of a lot of anxiety about, worried about afterlife, worried about, making this life, I don't know, being this sort of existential angst that comes with living, that most people go through. Mm-hmm. But to know that, we're kind of determined, we're kind of on a ride and we're just experiencing this ride, is kind of deep and sort of spiritual. I don't like that word spiritual, but it's kind of similar to what people mean by spirituality, I guess. And so in that sense, maybe.
Gotcha. So it's a way to feel like it's a lack of free will, almost like you're on the ride. Things are going to happen as they're going to happen, regardless of what I want to happen. So there's no sense in getting upset about it, whatever happens, that type of thing.
Sort of, and the other question that comes up, of course, I don't want to get too scientific and, kind of lose your listeners or anything, but we also have this thing called quantum mechanics, and we come into this problem of the uncertainty principle and non-locality and all of these sort of concepts that are proven true, and they kind of contradict relativity in a way, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that means reality is illogical, but I think that we just don't have the whole story. But some of the interpretations regarding quantum mechanics in this whole scenario is that possibly there's multi-universes and that each universe is a block universe. So decisions that we make, we kind of sort of do have a kind of free will in a way, in the sense that it's kind of random. So if we make decisions, maybe in this universe, there could be a possibility that we make a different decision in another universe. But each of those have their own timelines. They're all kind of determined based on the decisions you make. So it's kind of a weird way to describe free will if that was true. But of course, that's just another interpretation of quantum mechanics. So I have no idea whether that's true or not. Right?
Yeah, so Delon, this is why I like it when you call, because you're a deep thinker and you encompass a lot of ideas when you come in and call and talk to us and stuff. Sometimes I think it goes over some of our viewers' heads and it gets lost on some people. But and we have talked about this specific point before, but when it comes to quantum mechanics, that's a whole ball game of things that I don't even want to touch. I don't even want to deal with because Yep. I'm not qualified, but also because like 90% of the time when people are talking about quantum mechanics, they really have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not saying this is you, but I am saying that they usually use it to push a lot of woo and a lot of things saying like, oh, that you can phase through walls because quantum mechanics is a thing and that gives you these powers and abilities and stuff. So if we can,
And, you know,
I'd love to take the scope of
agree
this
with you 100%.
conversation just a little bit back down to earth a little bit.
Yep.
And again, this isn't me saying, oh, this belief is silly and it's wrong and you shouldn't have it. But it is me saying, well, we got a lot of people here who want to hear us get to the point about whatever we're trying to talk about. And I'm trying to contain it as much as possible, if that makes sense.
Right, right. Well, I just throw that out to put a little disclaimer out there
Sure.
on what I'm saying, because, you know, there are other views that kind of, but at the end of the day, it's still kind of, we still kind of know that relativity it works for us. We know that it gives us the technology that we use every day. I mean, just like quantum mechanics does, but I mean, it all works for us. And so if I'm consistent with these ideas, then I can kind of carve out a nifty little worldview out of it. I mean, it is an interpretation, but
this sounds like
I want to base it on some kind of facts, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like this is a belief that you want to set the record straight on because it gives you comfort in a sense.
Yeah, comfort.
This
exactly.
idea of eternal life, that ultimately nothing changes and that there are forces beyond us and stuff. I can see how that can be appealing, and that can give us comfort. Reed, did you have a question you want to ask?
Not really. This is a big topic that I have no expertise in, and
so
it would take a long time to pick apart.
Yeah, you know, again, like these ideas can be so complex. And this is an interesting point to factor in when we're talking about these beliefs, because the more that we talk about things that we don't understand, the more the possibility that could be being wrong. I don't know what your educational background is, Delon, but let's say that there is a misinterpretation among some of the science that we're talking about here along the way. And we found that out after doing a bit of research. Like, let's say the science of relativity has changed a little bit, and that we've learned some new information. Would that change the way that you believe this belief? Would your confidence in this? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I always say that at you know, when I call in is, you know, I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything. I mean, I read a lot of things. I've been to college and I've studied physics, you know, in school, and I've studied philosophy and a lot of things. But, you know, the one big axiom about, you know, critical thinking and science is it's not about 100% certainty, and it's not about going into a theory trying to prove it right. In fact, good science tries to prove things wrong. You know, you try to disprove hypothesis. That's the whole idea. Pseudoscience likes to make a claim and then try to find evidence to support it. It's totally ass backwards, right?
Yes. And
so right now, as it stands, the best thing that we have are things like relativity theory, quantum mechanics, evolution. These things are you know, reasonably certain, right?
And you want to build your belief on things that are reasonably certain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
And it just so happens that when we talk about eternal life, it just so happens that there's kind of a way to kind of find a little comfort just based on the science. I think Einstein even was quoted as saying that time is a persistent illusion. I think he was at a funeral, and somebody was grieving the death of a colleague of his. And he says, you know, I understand the sadness, but for us physicists, we understand that time is just a persistent illusion.
Ooh.
So he kind of felt the same way, you know.
That's pretty BA
theory.
If he really said that. That'd be cool. Especially in like, what, 1926 or...
Yeah, way back. Yeah,
where he was like, and nobody knew anything about most people didn't know anything about relativity and stuff. That'd be cool.
Exactly.
But yeah, I appreciate your sincerity in having a belief that is based on things you can be reasonably certain about.
Right.
And so with that, I don't think there's much Reed and I can challenge you on unless we were more informed on the specific topics that your beliefs are based on and the research that goes into it. And I'd say keep looking for ideas that you can be reasonably certain about and see what you can take away from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reed, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
I mean, even like for whatever I believe, I want to have markers that would change my mind. Even like gravity, like if I drop this, if it goes up, that would change my mind about gravity in some way. If I did that a lot. So does he have any markers in his mind that would change his mind about this?
Great question.
Were true.
Good question.
Yeah, if you know, a lot of this block theory of time hinges on the idea that time and space are connected, and that they can be equated to a coordinate, and based on that is how we get, you know, the Mars rover to Mars. It's how we get, you know, we adjust for the time in our GPS devices from the satellites to our phones. If none of that stuff worked, if it turns out that, you know, this stuff doesn't really work, that it is actually accounted for some other reason other than relativity that we just didn't know, then that would be a marker to change my mind, you know?
Yeah, you mentioned it was like B theory. Is there an A theory?
Yeah, it's called B. Yeah, it's called block theory or B theory for short.
Oh,
and,
so it's not.
I think
it's not
there's
like
a lot of videos. Yeah, check it out on YouTube. I think Brian Greene, Sean Carroll, Max Tegmark, Michio Kaku, they all have videos regarding it.
Yeah,
about it.
This is something I read about. I read Lawrence Krauss's A Universe from Nothing.
Yeah, he's another one.
And I think that's the first time when I really heard about this topic. That was a year or two ago. And it was, from what I could understand of it, it was very fascinating.
Yeah, blew my mind, man.
I'm sure this theory should be able to make predictions. I don't know if we have the capacity to test these predictions, but whatever those predictions are, they should be able to
time travel.
To fail.
That's the prediction.
Time travel.
Time travel. If you can travel to the past or the future, then you'd pretty much know it was absolutely true.
All right. Well, let's invent time travel then. I think that's where.
Yep,
I think that's the logical conclusion to this conversation right here, is that we got to do it, boys. We're the only ones that can. So, I'm looking forward to it. We'll do it. Anyway, Delon, this was another interesting conversation. Thanks again for calling in. I really appreciate the support, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Sure will. Talk to you guys later.
See you later.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. Time. You know what I'm saying? It's like a block. It's a big old block. You just got to look at it from the right perspective.
I mean, there's a lot of crazy ideas that a lot of smart people believe or hold to be possible and maybe like very plausible, like physicists and theoretical physicists. So I have no idea what could possibly be true in that regard. I
definitely can't rule it out. Right? Like it's not within my expertise to do that. But interestingly enough, we may be able to talk about this topic a little bit more